Welcome to the Sovereignty Movement's weekly Zoom series on current affairs. This evening, we have the pleasure and honor of hosting Gol Kalev. Gol Kalev is one of the most original and thought-provoking voices, analyzing the major geopolitical, cultural, and ideological shifts shaping our world today. As a columnist for the Jerusalem Post, he examines long-term global trends, developments in Europe, and the evolving relationship between Zionism, Judaism, and international affairs. He's the author of several influential books, including From Survival to Peace, right here, I have it, very recommend that. The Assault on Judaism, the Existential Threat is Coming from the West. Judaism 3.0, Judaism Transformation to Zionism. As chairman of the Judaism 3.0 think tank and a researcher of Theodor Herzl's vision, he brings together historical insight and contemporary strategic thinking, applying Herzl's ideas to some of the most pressing issues of our time on the future of Israel, the Jewish people, and the Western world. Gol's background is as diverse as it is impressive. After growing up in Tel Aviv and serving in the Israeli army, he moved to New York, where he built a career as an investment banker specializing in mergers and acquisitions and capital raising for financial institutions around the world. Today, he lives in Jerusalem, where he continues his research, writing, and public engagement. This evening, we look forward to hearing his insights. Please join me in giving me a warm welcome to Gol Kalev. Welcome, Gol. Thank you for joining us. Your topic this evening is a little bit scary. It's a new vision for peace. I think many Israelis have become very wary wherever they hear the word peace. Peace initiatives have been accompanied by disappointment, painful concessions, and terrible tragedy. As a result, many people here in Israel immediately ask, what price will Israel be expected to pay now? There's also a perception that those who speak about peace are sometimes guided more by wishful thinking than by reality, while Israel is expected to always bear the risks. Having read your book, though, I can assure our audience that we are not talking about another version of the Oslo paradigm. Had that been the case, honestly, Yehudit and I would not have invited you this evening. What we found in your writing was a fresh and thought-provoking approach that challenges many conventional assumptions. So let us ask you, what makes your vision of peace different from the visions of the past, and why should Israelis view it differently? The floor is yours for 30 minutes, followed by a Q&A. Guys, turn off, make sure your microphones are off. Here we go, 30 minutes.
Okay, 30 minutes. Thank you very much. And to answer your question quite bluntly, what makes this vision for peace a little bit different is exactly because what you just said, that you've endorsed it, because I presented to people on the left and the right, to pro-Palestinian groups. I was in Vermont talking to Bernie Sanders crowd and to people like you guys that are not so much on the left. And some people agree and disagree. I don't want to say it's non-political, but it's different ideas. So one thing that makes it maybe a little bit different than to answer your questions directly is that it has a coalition of people that represents a very diverse backgrounds in terms of political views and religious background, Muslims, Christians, atheists, Jews, etc. The other is that it's not coming from the point of view of let's make a new peace plan. It's really, because we have 30 minutes, we're zero. You mentioned my 3 books. This is basically the last chapter of the last book I've written, but we have to zoom the conversation. We call it zoom out, but we have to zoom in it on a particular topic. So, my other books, this is really the third of a series of books that are all interrelated. In my 2022 book, Judaism 3.0, I showed how Judaism is transforming and Zionism is becoming its anchor. Whether we like it or not, people relate to the Jews and Judaism through the prism of the Jewish state and Zionism, and therefore age-old opposition to Judaism is funneled in that direction. In my book in 2024, The Assault on Judaism, the Existential Threat is Coming from the West, I warned of this very fast-moving attempt to negate the idea of the Jewish state and through the idea of Judaism, which is coming from Europe and its proxies. And I showed how this amounts to a national security threat to the United States. And argued that we need to devise a comprehensive national security strategy, treat the ideological threat in the same way that we treat the physical threat. So that was the previous book. And in this book, I continue with this theme and show how we can take this realities that were created by the assault on Judaism and turning it around into this vision for peace. I think that before I get into the few points about the vision, just maybe two general points. One is that we are living. We have to look at the macro environment, like taking a step back. When you look at where we are in history, we are today in 2026 at a pivotal moment in Europe's fall from grace, meaning for 2,000 years, Europe dominated the world. And you know that, we know that, I'm in Jerusalem, you, I believe, are in Hebron. The Greeks came here, the Romans came here. That from that point on, until about 100 years ago, if you had to measure the global GDP, it will be Europe. Europe controlled the seas, controlled overseas colonies, controlled the global narrative. It was all Europe. And then 100 years ago, something, radical happened, which is that power has shifted from Europe to the United States, something that Europe has not come to terms with. And one of the ways in which they oppose the United States is through Israel. So in the physical assault from Iran and its proxies, Israel is little Satan and America is big Satan. In the ideological assault coming from Europe and its proxies, Israel is little war criminal and America is big war criminal. And Secretary Rubio made it clear, and others have made it clear as well. What's happening with the ICC is basically a practice run to see if they can cut and paste those indictments and indict American political leaders, American soldiers, American government employees, ICE agents, anybody that is part of what Europeans might view as war crimes, or really somebody who's not adhering to the European way. So Europe control, and the reason I'm saying that is because one of the things that Europe control was peacemaking, meaning the frameworks that have been used over the last 100 years when it comes to the Israeli-Arab conflict has all been Europeans, which makes sense because Europe created this. Europe created this conflict, whether we like it or not. And I talk about it openly to my friends in Europe, in the EU and in European governments. 1920, we had, in a sense, in 1920, a utopian peace here, if you will, a two-state solution, or an organic version of a two-state solution between a Jewish state in the making in Palestine, which included today's Israel, the West Bank, parts of the other side of Jordan, and a Hashemite kingdom in Syria. And everything was fine until the Syrian invaded. This was very short-lived. This was only a few months, but the French invaded. They wanted Syria for themselves. They wanted Lebanon for themselves. And that started a whole thing. Then, we had the British reneging on their mandate, the Germans getting in because they were using forces here to oppose the British, the EU later. So this conflict is European, but also the peace frameworks are European, are basically European academic concepts that were not just came from EU and Europe, but also from its proxies in the UN and in certain elements within the United States Democratic Party and the State Department, such as the idea that we can use land as a currency for peace. The idea of the two-state solution, which has absolutely nothing to do with Palestinians or the Middle East. In fact, it is a form of white colonialism, trying to replace the organic Palestinian idea of from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. I'm not supporting that idea, but that is the organic Palestinian idea. And here comes some, white colonialist people from some EU, or European foreign offices and says, no, it's really from the borders of the Hashemite to the Green Line, the West Bank will be free. I mean, that doesn't really make any sense to anybody. But that was the two-state solution has been the dominating framework and all sorts of derivatives of that. So much so that you weren't allowed, there was no room to have any other peace frameworks. So as long as Europe and its proxies were in power and were here and dominated the Middle East, people, both European governments and the previous administration used a position or trying to undermine the two-state solution as a supporting reason for sanctions. I mean, it was that much. Or when you asked Secretary Blinken, who basically followed this European logic, the two-state solution is dead, right? I mean, can you concede that? And he says, no, I cannot concede that because the two-state solution can never be dead. It's an impossibility. So it was in the two-state solution we trust. There was, we can talk. I've written about it in my previous book. We don't, but the point is that now we're seeing a process of de-Europeization, and with it there is room for other peace frameworks. So the de-Europeization is, there's three main events that occurred this year in 2026 that has to do with peace or has to do with anything in the Middle East. And all of them, Europe was not there. One was the Iran war. And it's quite stunning because Europe was attacked. Europe was attacked, Cyprus, because that's as far as they can reach. And it was very clear they can reach farther. And Europe said, this is not our war. This is an official European statement. This is not our war. And we're not necessarily going to help you, America and Israel. So Europe was absent from the Iran war. And Trump made it very clear in other contexts that to the victors goes the spoils. Meaning, if you're absent from the war, you'll also be absent from the peacemaking arrangements. So Europe was absent from the Iran war. Europe was absent from the Board of Peace, which is quite interesting because in the initial meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh, they all flew in, as President Trump said, on a second notice and kind of made their way behind Trump, those European leaders, and according to the European press, completely humiliated themselves, standing there. Trump said, I have no idea what they're doing here behind me. But when it came down to the tachlis, to actually forming the Board of Peace, Europe said, we're out. We're not joining the Board of Peace. We're not doing peace because it's not our structures. So Europe is out of the Board of Peace. Europe is out of the Iran war. And now we have an actual peace talks, for the first time in many years between Israel and Lebanon, between Israel and Arab countries, and Europe is not there. It's Israel, Lebanon, and the United States. So we're seeing a golden opportunity to move from sort of like the European occupation, if you will, of the mind frame of both Palestinians and Israelis and other Arabs around the Middle East, and let us, children, make true peace based on organic Middle Eastern realities and not just serving European interests and European templates. So that's the general background. I sort of like discussed this background in the first few chapters of the book that you mentioned, the From Survival to Peace, which is just coming out. Has been soft launched, so it is available already. But then in the last chapter, as you mentioned, I offer how can this translate into this organic vision for peace. And I'll just mention 2 or 3 points now, and you can read the rest in the book or in articles around it, because I want to leave time for questions. One is there are seismic changes that are happening in our time beyond the idea of Europe. There's changes that are happening that in the Middle East. The quick fall of Syria, the reemergence of Turkey that's only been 100 years since they left the Middle East, and other areas. And it's only been 2 years and a half since October 7th. And October 7th had many, many ripples effect that we can touch about 1 or 2 later. But one of them was the attitude towards the Palestinians, because this was an event in which the West completely dehumanized the Palestinians. And it was very duly noticed, because in Gaza, there was a war. There was a horrible condition. And you can, debate about the degree of the humanitarian crisis, but nobody doubts that there was a dire humanitarian crisis. And when there's war and humanitarian crisis, people and misery, people want to flee. And it happened in every single war around the world, in Iraq, in Libya, in Ukraine, and in Israel. People left southern Israel and northern Israel when they were at risk. The only people that were not allowed to flee a war zone were the people in Gaza, were the Palestinians. The West basically, instead of being instrumental at finding out, escape routes, they blocked them. And then when Trump came to power, he says, we're going to help them and have a relocation proposal. And everybody objected to it. The West, the same people that did not craft this exit routes for those Palestinians who wish to leave, completely objected to the Trump relocation proposal. And that's very telling. And the reason is because the focus has never been on Palestinian human rights. The focus has been on Palestinian national rights. And I think what the Trump administration is doing, and what I am talking a little bit about the book, is what I call Palestinian personal self-determination, meaning allow the Palestinian to choose. Don't tell him you must stay in Gaza because we in the West decided that you need to have a 2-state solution. If you want to leave, you should be able to leave. And so that's just one kind of obvious snippet, empowering, when we shift from a European-dominated framework that basically dehumanized the Palestinians, not just in Gaza. Throughout the last, like in the conflict industry, I have friends who work in the various UN agencies and NGOs, the famous cases of like SodaStream and other areas in which the West comes in and says to the Palestinians, you're going to lose your job. We're going to rob you from being employed in Jewish-owned businesses because it doesn't fit with what you should be aspiring for, which is national rights. So there is I think a very clear shift that we're seeing in a number of arenas from this obsessive Western imposed focus on Palestinian national rights at the expense of Palestinian human rights, back to Palestinian human rights as human as individuals who can decide, if they want to stay, if they want to leave. Now, in the context of Gaza, we have to be clear that, even if they were allowed to leave and, they weren't, there needs to be, attractive places, that will take them. And the entirety of the focus was on charity-related stuff, meaning, ask, Indonesia to take a few, ask, this to take a few. What I've learned, you mentioned I researched Theodor Herzl and apply his vision to today's reality. So this is one of his applications. Herzl understood that charity only goes a certain way. Rather than charity making people's interest, Herzl was a prototype of capitalism. He merged socialism into capitalism. And he said, I want, in his case, Jews to leave Europe to back home, because they need to have an incentive to do that. So one of the elements that I write in the book is what I call the California of the Middle East. And that is, coming from the idea that if you look at the totality of the Middle East, you have the entirety of the Middle East population, or almost the entirety, concentrated in a very small piece of land that runs from the Mediterranean to just, somewhat east of the Jordan River, to somewhat east of Amman. The vast majority of the Middle East is empty desert land. And I'm talking about building the California of the Middle East on what is today the Iraqi-Jordanian border or the Syrian desert, all the way farther east, for a number of reasons. One is because of what I just mentioned. It makes no sense that you have a region with such population concentration where you have such empty land reserves. Now, it made sense until a few years ago because those land reserves are desert. And until a few years ago, you could not live in the desert. Now, Israeli technologies have basically canceled the deserts. There's a few dozens Israeli technologies, maybe a few hundreds Israeli technologies, turning air into water, blooming the desert, irrigation technologies. It's not just Israeli technologies. There is no need. The desert is no longer a hurdle to be living in the desert. So the vision that I outline in the book and in articles around it, just on a wave-top level, is to have the same process in the Middle East that you had in the United States in the 19th century. In the United States, you had go west. People started to say, well, I want to have this entrepreneurial spirit. I want to, I don't want to live in my little, refugee camp in the Lower East Side of New York. I want to have a better future. So if you wanted to stay in the Lower East Side of New York, you're welcome to. But some people says, no, I want to go west. I want to, explore, and I want to build, and I want to. So I'm talking about building the California, go east, building the California of the Middle East for those who want to. And that, as I mentioned, has a lot of hurdles. One of the hurdles has been the desert. That hurdle has been basically only in the last few years done away with because of agriculture and other type of technologies, satellite communication, things like that. The other two big hurdles to that, one is labor. I'm talking about, maybe building golf courses, a Riviera, cities, industrial zones, factories. You need an enormous amount of labor, and also, a wall which is already partially built, which I'll get to, to protect, from the east. That requires an enormous amount of labor, and there's a global labor shortage. There's certain countries not too far from here that are under existential threat because of global shortage. Anybody, in business understands that. But now there's a one-time opportunity where there may not be this global work shortage because we have the availability, presumably, of willing workers in Gaza that would want to go there and perhaps work for a few years or longer and bloom the desert and maybe become rich, becoming entrepreneurs, maybe become workers. So there is availability of labor. Palestinians are high-skilled laborers. Israelis know that. That are very, let's say, experienced labor. They've been building a lot of the main infrastructure projects in Israel. So, this anomaly that existed, Trump talks about a relocation proposal that, voluntary relocation for those who want to work while he's building Gaza, Lago in Gaza. So, this would be an opportunity to both, allow those individuals who want to leave to go there to have not just work, but entrepreneurial opportunities, but also to address this labor shortage. Another is funding. This is an extremely expensive project. And, there's no funding usually, except now that there is an environment like we had after World War II of some sort of a Marshall Plans. Everybody's talking about spending a lot of money. There's commitment, soft commitment, hard commitment. And, people talking about it in the context of pouring it all in Gaza. But, rather than, put more money in a swamp or maybe do that in addition, there's opportunity in a Tabala Rusa, basically empty land, to build and to deploy the capital there to address that hurdle. Another issue that supports the idea of building the California of the Middle East is that it's everybody's interest. We're moving here. I think one of the things that President Trump is doing, and one of the things I'm talking about in the book, is to move for peace frameworks that are based on divide the baby, on zero-sum game, on taking something that's not dividable and dividing it somehow so we can get a few years of quiet until we have the next war that fights over what we just divided. That's basically been what the peace through appeasement frameworks of Europe for 2,000 years, maybe. I mean, if you look at anything in Europe, even recent history, meaning the last 150 years, the 1870 war between Germany, what became Germany and France, basically created, Germany won. So there was 40 years of sense of revenge in France that was building up to correct, but there was a peace agreement in 1870, but wasn't a peace agreement. It was divide the baby situation that nobody was happy about. World War I happened, and Germany was unhappy. World War II, same thing. So rather than divide the baby, move to win-win deals like the Abrams Accord and like what I just mentioned vis-a-vis the California of the Middle East. And you have leadership in place, starting with President Trump, that is not just kind of wedded into what was the most recent memo and building from that, not just let's build on previous, frameworks we have leadership that is now strong and willing to do bold decisions. And I'm talking about not just about President Trump, but about Arab leadership that the president has very good relationships with. And this new reality is that Israelis and Arabs are working together. It's no longer a secret. There is a new alliance, an American-Israeli-Arab alliance that stands in somewhat of a contrast to the European, that hopefully they can join this alliance at some point, but right now they're more or less resisting it. So you can have all of this happening, and it's in the interest of everybody. This is not at the expense of somebody else. And this is all based on voluntary. This is all based on, people doing what they believe that is good for them, until the peace vision that you said didn't work in the past, where it's trying to force people to leave their homes, to compromise, to give up their dreams. I mean, how can you ask a Palestinian, invest, through UNRWA, billions of dollars to tell a Palestinian in Gaza that his core essence is relocation back to Tel Aviv, he belongs in Tel Aviv or in Herzliya, and then switch and says, actually, you belong in Jenin or you belong in Gaza. You can't really play, you got to do you can't dictate to people what they need to do. So this is all based on people's interests, and as I mentioned, on personal self-determination. And the last thing I mentioned, because to allow time for Q&A on this, is that another lesson that we had from October 7th and the events of the last 2.5 years is that is about defense lines and defensible borders. If the border around Gaza, which was the most sophisticated border you can imagine, with cameras and walls, and if basically a militia, a gang, could break through this wall and was in the danger of conquering Israel, then that teaches us that the Jordan River is not a defensible border for Israel nor the West. Same with the shores of Europe. There's been a lot of people, I don't want to say invasion, that's other people use this word, but you can call whatever it is, but you have mass influx of people that are coming to Europe based on what they want, meaning you have migrants or other people coming at the shores of Italy, the shores of any place in Europe, and Europe with all the boats and the military and NATO cannot stop them. So, as long as it's just workers and immigration that will change the character of Europe and not terrorists, then fine. But once it changes, the defense lines of Europe cannot be the Mediterranean Sea. The defense line of Israel cannot be the Jordan River. So what this vision of the California of the Middle East shifts east the defense line to what today is the Iraqi-Jordanian border. And that doesn't just protect Europe and the West and Israel, that protects Jordan, our ally, that protects our other allies in the Middle East. And that makes future invaders and disruptors, be it Iran or the next Iran or other actors that are rising in the Middle East, that reduces their incentive to invade because they know the chances are less so. So I expanded those ideas and related ideas in the book, but the key message here is that we're moving from frameworks that are meant to perpetuate conflict, divide the baby, buy a few more years, to win-win deals, that will have enough interest in economics for everybody, that we are doing things that are organic to the Middle East, based on Middle Eastern realities, and not, Western colonialist ideas, and that we have strong leaders that you mentioned dreams, that this is how everybody has their dreams. And these are Herzl said that what he does is dreams, but he also said that the difference between dreams and realities are not as big as people think. And the translation of those dreams to realities can happen now because of a perfect storm of circumstances, including the leadership of President Trump, his strong relationship with Arab leaders, the strength of Arab leaders, and also dynamics that we have here in Israel, that we can make those deals happen, and we can really move forward. And the biggest circumstances that enable all of this, as I mentioned, is this de-Europeization. I like Europe a lot. I have a lot of friends in Europe, in the EU. I talk to them about this openly. But Europe has been disruptive. They've prolonged the conflict here. They've conflicticized this conflict to the tunes of billions of euros. And it's time for Europe now to go home and focus on Europe, which has become a threat to global stability. The president identified the threat from Europe, the ideological threat that's emanating from Europe, included that in the 2025 National Security Strategy. So, all of this allows us to now have vision for peace that is based on something that's totally different and new thinking. So more in the book, in my Jerusalem Post column, and in the various media that I do. And it's always good to talk to groups like you and everybody from all sides of the political spectrums, to talk about it and to try to get as much support for that.
So first of all, thank you. I'll take the right, if you guys don't mind, for the first question, to be the first one to ask the question, and then anybody else who wants to ask question. And I'll tell you, in 30 minutes, you can't really have a summary of this entire book. I read it also. There's a chapter there basically where you explain that the idea of a Palestinian people is something that's not exactly you tell exactly what the truth is. You tell about how the Europe wants to really destroy Judaism, basically. It's also very interesting. But what I want to talk, because I represent here at Yehudit Katsover, myself, and the sovereignty movement, that we are promoting the vision of the Jewish people, which is Jewish sovereignty over the land of Israel, from the river to the sea, Israeli sovereignty. And one of the main questions that people are asking always is, well, there are other people here. There's like 1.8 million Arabs in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza. And here, all of a sudden, nobody really dared to speak. We were labeled, those who dare to speak about relocation, or maybe you use the word relocation, which is also great. They used to talk about, gerush, about expulsion. And all of a sudden you put it in a nicer way. You even say that it's for the betterment of the life of the Palestinians, you say yourself. But what I want to quote, and I'm getting to my question, is that finally President Trump came and said, we have to relocate them, the Trump relocation plan. And you write here on page 168, the Trump relocation plan gives Gaza refugees an opportunity to not only have a better life, etc., to emancipate themselves from oppressive Western dogmas. That's what you just explained. But then you said something interesting. You're not only talking about the Arabs of Gaza, you also would like to expand the Trump relocation plan to include the 1948 refugees, page 171, i.e., you're talking about the Arabs of Judea and Samaria, that should basically also join this relocation and go and develop the Eastern Jordan, the plan of the desert in the Eastern Jordan. And my question to you is, if we want this one Jewish state, from the river to the sea, we're smaller than New Jersey, as you know. What about the Israeli Arabs? What do you think should be with
Okay,
should
so
they also
first
be
I'd like
offered?
to disagree a little bit with the characterizations. As I mentioned, I talked to various groups, and I don't support or not support the agendas of the groups I talk to.
Wow, that's why
So,
I read the book, and this was my interpretation. I don't want to say, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I just want to clarify this.
Okay.
And just a little bit of a nuance. First of all, I am talking about a capitalistic-based voluntary relocation. And when I talk about building of the California of the Middle East, you can relocate there too if you'd like to. I mean, this creates opportunities for people to become millionaires, or to people to have jobs, or to people to have labor. So I'm talking about creating opportunities, but I think, very specific in my book that people will decide. So the Palestinian Gaza should, in my personal view, should be allowed to decide that to stay in Gaza. And my understanding of the Trump relocation proposal, that it allows him to do that. But it should also allow him to relocate if he chooses to. And that's a little bit of a nuance.
I'm sure many want. The younger generation wants to.
Fine, but that's a little bit of a nuance, and I know, so I'm talking about basically people doing what they want. As far as the 1948 refugees, I've said it a few times, that there is a dehumanization of the Palestinians from the West. I'm not trying to
guys, close your microphones. Those who we hear somebody. Thank you. Yeah.
So the people are saying that there is the relocation program is a humanitarian idea to address people who've been refugees for the last 2 years, meaning they've lost their homes in Gaza. Bernie Sanders gets on the Senate floor and says, I think I can remember the exact number, 87% of the houses in Gaza are demolished. You cannot live in Gaza. So you should support the right of that individual that doesn't have a home to relocate. If he wants to stay living in a tent on the sea, as some of the quote unquote pro-Palestinians suggest, that's fine. But
Shimshon, your microphone is open. Please close it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let Gold continue, and then we'll have other questions. Yes.
So another form of Western oppression, if you will, of Palestinians have been the whole thing of keeping them refugees for 80 years. Meaning, I mean, this silliness of telling a Palestinian in Gaza or in refugee camps in the West Bank that one day you're going to go back to Tel Aviv and we're going to invest billions and billions of dollars to UNRWA and other NGOs to remind you that, and to deny you any other kind of right. That's dehumanization. And I say, let's stop that. So if a Palestinian wants to stay in Gaza or in the West Bank, I'm saying stay. But if you want to live and be part of this entrepreneurial idea, then great. Same thing with Israelis. Same thing with the Jews in the West Bank and the Jews everywhere, to answer your question. So this is two separate, these are two things. This is, as I mentioned, a perfect storm of conditions that allows, this vision for peace. But very simplistically, there is this vision for this California of the Middle East that will have, built by people from various countries, including, I mentioned, Israeli technologies that can contribute to that, Palestinian laborers and others, that choose to go there. And again, I'm drawing here from Theodor Herzl, from I research him in a very, very deep way. I go to the places where, he wrote and see, letters that he wrote to others while he was writing particular ideas. So I tried to get the bottom of his thinking when he was thinking how he's going to, create this Jewish state, convince, Jews that are so comfortable in Europe because Europe is great and so nice to us, to move and bloom the desert here. So I'm basically, this is a continuation of this vision.
Somebody's asking, where is this California of the Middle East meant to be? I think that you answered that question, but maybe you want to repeat it exactly.
Well, I was saying on the Iraqi-Jordanian border, there's always, this is a very top level thing. I also say in the book that things like that, in the context of a book or articles, need to be very top level and general ideas, because there's not something that can be discussed in articles or
30
TV
minutes, right.
podcasts. That needs to be discussed between the leaders. And now we have strong leaders who can discuss this, where, how, who. But directionally, this relates also to moving the defense line eastwards to protect the Arab Middle East, to protect Israel, to protect Europe, and bloom the Syrian desert. So you have what today is the borders between
Next
Syria.
time you bring a map. Next time, bring us a map.
I'm deliberately not bringing a map because I want to be top level. People who will actually from the foreign offices or wherever, who's going to think tanks will discuss, implement this, will bring the map, as they've done in 1919. So I'm not trying to create the Paris Peace Conference here and draw the maps. By the way, I am trying to create the Paris Peace Conference when it comes to Europe. This is unrelated, but about 6 years ago, I said that rather than have the old European ways of have a massive war and then a peace conference, let's have a preemptive peace conference in Europe that can avoid the war of European succession, but that's a separate topic. So this is
questions, guys. Yes, let's have, if anybody else has question, Julie. I can see where I'm going to see if I can see other people.
I opened.
Julie?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It sounds like a very interesting book. So you're saying it's very visionary in that. My first question is, why would Jordan ever agree to this when they haven't agreed to take Palestinians who are naturally supposed to be in Jordan all these years? And whoever's controlling Syria and Iraq today, why would they want that? And the second part is, why would we want to send them all as a population? And we see that when they're together, they make a lot of trouble. Like, wouldn't it just be so much better for each country? There's so many countries in the world with labor shortages, South Korea and Europe. Just send them in groups of 20,000 and don't let them establish Hamas or radical educational systems and everything.
Oh.
It seems like there's already like an easier solution than I don't even know if you've looked into this theoretical place, but like my dad lives in Arizona and they can't go there in the summer. It's so hot. You can't get people to go to the Jordan Valley and live there. I don't know who's going to want to live in a desert. It's not California, it's Arizona.
And still a lot of people live in Arizona. Look,
they do, but not in the summer.
Okay, so let me answer those 3 points. First of all, I'm not sending anybody, and this is maybe a difference between, and a disagreement between, I think, the language of you and Nadia and the group and me. I'm talking about this is completely voluntary, available to everybody. I'm not sending anybody. As far as the question of why would Jordan agree, why they wouldn't agree to take Palestinians, because taking Palestinians is a threat, should rightfully, I think, be viewed by Jordan as a threat. I mean, we were, Black September, they basically tried to take over Jordan, not too long ago in 1970. Eventually they took over southern Lebanon. So it's a threat and perceived as a threat. This is the opposite of a threat. This keeps them, because one of the lessons, I think, of October 7th, or the reasons where I mentioned that the Gaza border is not, if the Gaza border can be breached so easily, then this little water in the Jordan River can easily be crossed. So people, and the only thing that stands in the way between Iran or another force coming from Iraq or the north, some sort of a Turkey or a Turkey-backed militia, the only thing that stands in the way is Jordan. So Jordan has the hugest bullseyes on it because it stands on the way to conquer Israel. And the people who want to conquer us have just noticed that, if a gang can break, a well-secured wall, then they can flow through the Jordan River and be joined on the other side with friendly population to them, meaning the Palestinians of the West Bank. So it is in Jordan's interest to move eastwards. Also, this will dramatically change the economic prospects of Jordan, because we're talking about, I'm talking about a massive project that will be, about California. You mentioned Arizona. I'm talking about Arizona is great, and so I'm kind of answering your question with your third question. Arizona, so you don't want to live in the desert; it's too hot. Fine, but there's a lot of people that chose to live in Arizona and chose to live in Nevada and chose to live in California. Nobody forced them to go there. Nobody forced those Jews in the Lower East Side, who were like living in tenements, or Irish immigrants to go west. And nobody's forcing people from here to go east, but people want to. And, as I mentioned, Israeli technologies make life in the desert livable now. And that's something new. And people are kind of like, didn't notice this because, we're like in the day-to-day life, this something that didn't exist 10 years ago. So this is in the interest and I explain it more in the book and literature around it, of everybody. This is the interest of quite literally everybody, not of disruptors. It's not in the interest of Hamas, it's not in the interest of Iran, but it's in the interest of this new alliance that's been formed between the United States, Israel, and the Arab countries and the Arab population. In my view, it's in the interest of Palestinians, but only in my view, Palestinians can decide what's in the interest of Palestinians. That's what I talk about. Personal self-determination, which is a departure from what we had until now, which is Europeans deciding for them under the concept of we don't care about your personal self-determination, we only care about your national rights. Your second question is a question that I was asked when I presented it in the United States and to others, which is the security threat of the day after Gaza, meaning like Hamas. You can't just kind of like get rid of Hamas and expect that, okay, everybody will be liberated from Gaza. There is a view, mostly coming from Europe, that everybody in Gazans would love to go to concert halls and it's just like wonderful people, but they were occupied by Hamas in the same way that the Germans were occupied by the Nazis. And once there was denazification of Germany, the Germans are great today, and same thing with Gaza. That's we don't need to spend time on that. That's not the case. 20 years of indoctrination by Hamas on top of 100 years of indoctrination by Europe, takes its toll. So your concern is completely legitimate, and there's ways to address that. There's way to address so we're not trying to do the mistake. Basically, what happened between what I mentioned, Jordan, the Palestinian trying to take over Jordan in 1970 failed, King Hussein kicking them out. The Palestinian trying to create a Palestinian state in Jordan, King Hussein kicked them out, so they created a Palestinian state in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, Fatahland. Now a lot of people are saying, well, that's what's happening in Europe. There's going to be Fatahland is the model for the future Palestinian state in Europe, whether you call it a Palestinian state or a European Muslim state, whatever, but that's a different conversation. So that risk is valid, but there's way to learn from, to address that. We, I think, know, or I don't personally, but people know who are the more productive and constructive forces, clans within the Gazan societies, between those who would wish to raise their hand and says, we want to do this, who are the troublemakers. And there's ways to address that. And I'm talking, by the way, about a massive strip of land. So it's not that we're taking, if there's, according to the data that people say, like a million and a half of those 2 million would want to go, or a million would want to go. I'm not talking about creating Gaza in Jordan. I'm talking about, and this is an opportunity that other people would want as well, that are not from Gaza, including from Israel. So there's ways to address that. Your concern is legitimate and is one of the things that people, legitimately push back when I present it to kind of policy audiences. But there's ways to address that quite simply.
Thank you. Any other question?
I have a question. I'm sorry, I can't.
Can you identify?
Karen
Karen Stoll.
Hi.
Law,
Yes, I'm sorry, I can't.
International law. We don't see you.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm using someone's phone and it's not working right. I'm just curious how many Muslim Arabs living in Israel today and all over, that how many do you meet that support this idea and are ready to acknowledge that we are going to have a Jewish state here, and that people that live here will have to have allegiance to a Jewish state? How many Muslims have you met in that category?
So this is not what it's about. That's, I think, respectfully, the old framework. I'm talking about, this is not a detailed peace plan. Yeah, this is a general principles and vision that starts with let's you all mush together here. Let's expand other kind of, let's do things that are in the interest of everybody, move to all sorts of win-win deal that can benefit everybody. This is not coming out of, Muslims recognizing, the Jewish state of Israel, becoming Zionists. There's answers to that as well in other conversations. Kind of to say it in a nutshell, I really do not think, I disagree with those who say that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the most difficult conflict to solve. There are conflicts that are almost unsolvable, like in Europe, between Spain and Catalonia and France and Corsica, and now between veteran Europeans and Muslim Europeans. There are conflicts that are very difficult. Here, there's frameworks and ideas to solve. But I'm talking about not just Israel. I'm talking about the Middle East in totality. And this is a long-term vision, meaning once you have this economic-based idea that already has been proven well in other ways, we've seen projects associated with the Abrams Accords at a much lower scale. This is really scaling up the Abrams, the projects that are happening today under the Abrams Accord. Herzl said, I can do 2 + 2, so I can do 1 trillion + 1 trillion. And that's basically led him to Zionism and the Jewish state. So this is not, the exit point is different than yours of like how, do we get the Muslims to do this? Is creating the opportunity, understanding that there is unique opportunities to move from divide the baby frameworks, as I mentioned, zero-sum game. How do we take, into new concepts, new ideas that will allow us maybe in a few years to talk about the issues that you were talking about.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Because otherwise we're going to say thank you to Gol. I suggest you read the book. I'm sure we don't agree on everything, Gol, but what I liked by you is the thinking out of the box and looking at it differently. Here, this is the book. I did not stop reading it from the first page to the end. Obviously, not everything we agree on, but it's so great to look at. You're really doing a zoom out. That's what you're doing. You're doing a zoom out, and we thank you for that. Yeah. And the last question, if I can, I see that you're on CNN and you're on all the news. Is there any leaders that you spoke to that are interested in what you say? They say let's start this. Did you have any tachlis?
We'll let the leaders read the book and decide for themselves if they're interested or not. But I would just kind of say, relative to what you just said, that I think it's great to, most people, this is my third book. My first book, Judaism 3.0, was also meant to be non-political and presented to left and right audience. The second book, The Assault on Judaism, the same thing. And the publisher told me, and other people told me, that you're doing something that's not common, to try to talk to audience from the left and the right. It's not good for sales. You need to be, who are you against? I only want to be with the left-wing audience because I'm against, the settlers. I only want to be with the settlers because I'm against this. So I'm doing, with all of my work, with those books and my thing, something that's a little bit unconventional, which doesn't come from let's all find a common language to talk about. I'm coming from the point of view of, here are some ideas that you as right-wing audiences and others, some of my friends who are left-wing audience, pro-Palestinians, could agree or not agree. Not because I'm trying to get you together, because I'm throwing those ideas because they're my ideas. And to your question, some leaders, world leaders, diplomats who read this and engage with it will agree, and some will not, and some will
most important, where can we buy the book
and apply it to something completely different and take a snippet of that and develop another idea. And same with the audience. You or a pro-Palestinian person might like a chapter or hate a chapter and write a paper in opposition to it and have the meeting point with you there. So these are, my job is to write those ideas, to bring them out. And I'm glad that they're resonating and doing well with audiences on the left, on the right. So I appreciate the opportunity to present it to your...
Gol, the most important question, where can we buy the book? People are asking, where can we buy the book here?
Amazon, in Israel, in Stimatsky and in Pomerantz.
The book.
Yeah, Pomerantz bookstore, I think has the same day delivery, if I'm not mistaken, in Jerusalem. They have a website. You can send it out, Stimatsky, and in the US, in stores in the US, but mostly on Amazon. Most of the stuff is on Amazon, and it's both Kindle and
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who joined us. Next week will also be in English, as we promised you, a few English Zooms. Gol, it's fascinating, and keep up the good work, and Be'ezrat Hashem, we will see, and we'll be in touch. Kol Tuv, Laila Tov, Leitraot. This was filmed. And we're going
can I try again, Nadia? Can you hear me?
Oh, Shimshon.
Quickly, Shimshon. I've had trouble technically getting in, so I've finally got in. I'd like to congratulate you, Gol, on your very practical, hopefully realistic approach. to the problem we have. I'd like to ask you a question which is not directly related, but is interesting. What do you think the future of people in Europe are, with all the Muslims having entered Europe, dominating many of the countries already, France, England, etc.?
It's something I engage with a lot. I have a website called europeandjerusalem.com that for the last 12 years, 15 years, I guess, 12 years, I've been dealing with this. I'm very nervous that, as I mentioned earlier, that if Europe doesn't wake up, they might be heading towards, what I call the war of European succession, because we have three groups in Europe that don't talk to each other and negate each other. We have the integrationists, which I have to confess, a lot of them are my friends. I mean, most of my friends in Europe are integrationists, meaning people in cosmopolitan centers, people who support the EU, the United States of Europe. You have nationalists who are, Germans, French, and you have the Muslims. And those three groups, the integrationists are certain that sooner or later, the Muslims will be Europeanized, will integrate, just like they've done 2,300 years ago. They were certain that the Jews will be Hellenized. How can you not be, accept those Greek values? So, and it's not happening. And the same with they negate the nationalists, they dismiss them as racist. So you have this dichotomy. So that's why I thought Europe should enter, what I call the preemptive European Peace Conference, like they've done in 1919 after World War I, or in 1815 after the Napoleonic Wars. First have peace so you can avoid the war. But absent that, Europe becomes one of the most dominating threats to global stability. That's sadly a theme that I've been developing going back to the Judaism 3.0 think tank that we started in 2012, the book Judaism 3.0 in 2022. There's a European Muslim conflict, and Professor Ben Zion Netanyahu, Bibi's father, pointed out that throughout history, whenever there was a European Muslim conflict, the Jews paid the price. And that is the case today. I wrote an article last week that in my weekly Jerusalem Post column that shows how attacking Judaism and the Jewish state is becoming a European interest, because they're trying to find a common narrative for the Muslim population that's not about angst and frustration about European discrimination, about horrific images of armed French policemen approaching a Muslim woman on the beach and telling her to take her clothes off, basically because it's against the French law, about things that the Muslims view as a violation of their rights, of praying and things like that. They're trying to unite their narrative again in opposition to Israel. So so already we're seeing that this it's not Christian Muslim now, it's post-Christian or whatever, anti-theist versus Muslim, European Muslim conflict leads us to we pay the price here in Israel. So I'm really hoping that coming out of Europe, that this recommendation I had, main recommendation of my previous book, and that I had the chance to present to decision makers, that the most important thing as far as policy is concerned is to get Europe out of Israeli-Palestinian affairs completely. That will remove a hurdle to peace from this point of view, but it will also allow Europe to refocus its capital, instead of inciting, against war here, to refocus its capital, its energy, its ideas towards avoiding this global threats that's emanating from Europe. J.D. Vance said that, in the Munich Security Conference a year ago. Marco Rubio said that a few months ago in the Munich Security Conference, that there's a threat coming from Europe, and there should be an expectation that Europe will address that. So I'm really hoping that this de-Europeization that I'm talking about, that Europe is not part of the Iran war, not part of the Lebanon peace talk, not part of the Board of Peace, will give them the energy and time to solve their own issues and avoid this threat of war of European succession and the threat to global stability and U.S. national security that's emanating from Europe.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody.
Like the Jewish goodbye. We say goodbye a few times.
Shalom, shalom, shalom.
Okay.
Thank you,
okay.
Go.
Thank you. Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.